Welcome to another episode of the Vegan Pulse. I am your host, Nancy Arenas. Today, my guest, Max Broad. He is a longtime animal advocate who got started in the climate movement. In his work with Citizens Climate Lobby, he saw how influential a small group of passionate citizens can be in the policy process. He is part of the DC Voters for Animals, a political organization that coalesces the voice of the animal voters in Washington. Stick around. I'd like to introduce him to you. Hi, Max. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Nancy. Good to be here with you.
Thank you so very much for taking the time to be on the Vegan Pulse. I surely appreciate you doing that, and I appreciate what you do. But before we get to what you do, can you tell us how you came to veganism?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to throw it back at you, Nancy. I appreciate what you do. Thanks for having me on the Vegan Pulse. I'm a big fan. And I came to veganism through actually climate advocacy. My background is really in the environmental sphere. And, when I saw Food Inc., I had been vegetarian for about 4 years after seeing Food Inc. And then one day I went to an event, a cooking demo that PETA put on, and somebody there was talking about how much cows suffer when they give birth in the dairy industry, and then their calves are torn from them. And I thought that was just so unbelievably awful. And what I had to do was I had to anchor that in my climate advocacy and say, wait a second, here I am trying to make the world a better place to protect us from the worst wrath of climate change and lift up the marginalized voices who aren't contributing to the problem but are going to be worse affected by climate change. And yet I'm still throwing my money at the dairy industry, essentially paying somebody else to tear other baby calves away from their mothers. This isn't aligned with my values at all. So that's when I went vegan.
That is awesome. How long ago was that?
Oh boy, that was about 6 years ago.
Awesome. I've been vegan for 7 years now myself. And I did the same thing. The connection was the animals. Somebody had told me about going vegan for health, and I was like, oh, I'm going to die anyway. But when I asked the question, what's the difference between vegetarian and vegan? And they told me about the suffering that the animals have to go through. Then I said, okay, I'm vegan.
Right. That's so powerful. And it just goes to show that people come at this from many different ways. But it's important for us to be throwing all those messages out there.
Right. And now I want you to talk about DC Voters for Animals, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for asking. So what we're doing at DC Voters for Animals, we're based in the Douglas Commonwealth, we like to call it. So that's Washington, DC. We're calling it the Douglas Commonwealth because that's our bid for the 51st state as we're looking for statehood. But really, DC Voters for Animals is about animals and protecting animals. And so what we're doing is looking to lift up the policies and politicians who will do most for animals, whether that is, and we're a big tent organization. So we're working for companion animals, whether that's dogs and cats. We're working for wildlife. We're working for animals and farms and labs. We're trying to bring them all together and do what we can to elevate the discussion around protecting them in our local Washington, D.C. City politics.
That is great. And can you talk to the fact that, in order to help animals, I mean, it's great, we've gone vegan, but really we have to change laws, we have to change policies in order for it to really go mainstream. Wouldn't you agree?
You said that exactly right. When I went vegan, I did it because I didn't want to see harm happen to animals, and I didn't want to see my dollars pay for somebody else to harm animals. And I absolutely encourage everybody to do the same. Going vegan is an important first step, but really this is a systemic problem. We need systemic solutions. And I see policy as just one of the most important ways to advance that, because government right now, in many cases, is part of the problem. Government is part of the problem. We've seen, take a look at the dairy industry over the past decade. And, the dairy industry has just totally tanked. The values, or milk has been totally supplanted by non-dairy milk in a big way. Yet would you think that the dairy herd in the US has gone down or up? Well, over the past decade, there are now more cows than there were 10 years ago, which is just an awful sign. And why is that? Well, let's take a look at some of the government programs that subsidize milk, that dump milk and cheese on children in schools as a way to support dairy farmers. You know, right now, there are many instances where government is part of the problem, and we're out here to help government be part of the solution.
And that's great because, like you said, in giving kids cheese and milk in schools, people would think, oh, that's great. But I believe the statistics is over 60% of those kids are lactose intolerant. Well, rather, they're not baby cows. But,
Right.
and yet, even though, like you said, plant milk sales are going up, and yet you have more and more cows because the animal agriculture gets subsidized. And so they figure even if they lose money, they make money. And we have to stop that. We have to have people, like you said, change policy and say, this is not what we want our money to go to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And people oftentimes get disenchanted with government, and I understand why. It can feel frustrating, but really, politicians listen to the people who speak up. They listen to the loudest voices. And I know oftentimes folks feel like politicians only care about who has the biggest bucks and where the money is. But that's somewhat true. But also politicians, at the end of the day, they care about where they're going to get the votes. And so if us as vegans can be active and speak up in the political process, it can totally reshape the conversation around animal protection on our local, state, national level.
And I think especially now, because you have people like Cory Booker, you have Clifton Roberts, you have these politicians, from Brooklyn, the borough president, Eric Adams. You have these people in place right now who are willing to listen. And if we, locally wherever we are in our states, if we reach out to those representatives and those senators and say, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I want you to do. And, and the more people that they hear from, then they're going to have to change what they're thinking, and they're going to have to start voicing our voice, because that's what they're there for. And if they don't, then we need to not vote them in again.
That's absolutely right. And, in politics, the way it works is silence is consent. So if you're okay with what's going on, don't speak up in politics. But if you want something to change, you got to take action. And sure enough, we're seeing progress, like you mentioned, just in DC. Our new non-voting representative to Congress is vegan, right? So we have a new vegan representing us in DC. So, it's always great to see politicians and political animal activists speak up in the political process.
And, and it's time, like there are programs there, because we're not saying that people who are in animal agriculture or, in these industries, is not that we want them to go bankrupt per se, but exactly. Let's transition to a more sustainable kind of veg economy. You have farmers and, that I hear stories about that they've gone to either produce almond milk, soy milk, or, different kinds of things, more organic farming.
You're right. And, we've seen programs from Mercy for Animals and I believe Agriculture Fairness Alliance that are really working on that just transition so that we're not attacking the farmers. We're helping them move towards a new, more compassionate paradigm.
Right. It's like, what is it? The Rowdy Ranch Girl. I mean, I think that they have a program to help transition because they did that. They were in agriculture.
So wonderful.
So, and then talk about, I know we have only a few more minutes, but talk about the importance of, signing petitions and sharing information so that we can bring more awareness to people.
Yeah, well, over the past few years, I've seen people get kind of petition burnout and they feel like, oh, I'm signing hundreds of petitions and does it even do anything? Does it even go anywhere? And, I really encourage people to keep signing those petitions. I've seen firsthand from personal experience. They do work really well. They're really powerful. And, in general, just find your next biggest step in the political process, whether that's writing to your council member, it's calling your member of Congress, it's sending an email. Tweeting is really effective in politics. Nancy, guess how many tweets it takes on average to take a member of Congress's attention?
3.
3. They say about 12. So, it's very low, right? It's like if we just got a couple of our friends and we started tweeting at one elected official saying, hey, this is a really important issue, it would cause them to think about it in a way that they probably haven't before.
I have to confess that I cheated because I heard you say that in one of your other speeches. So I didn't know that. But when I heard that, I thought that is so important for people to know, because like you said, they're like, do they even see it? Do they even read it? And yes, it is effective.
Absolutely. Yeah. The more we speak up, the more we can expect to have our voices heard, obviously.
Thank you, Max, for being on the Vegan Pulse. I surely appreciate you taking time. I appreciate what you do in Washington, and you're just an inspiration, and thank you. So I have to say, ahimsa vegan. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Vegan Pulse. I am your host, Nancy Arenas. Remember, follow us on Facebook, check out our blog, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. Live vegan.